Well, you have to remember, first of all, this is a federal election, so, you know, there's certain issues that, you know, that are local government issues and provincial government issues. But there is one particular issue right here that the federal government can play a role in, and a significant one, I think. And of course, that's our resource industries. We're a resource-based economy here, especially forestry. You know, it's been our biggest resource and our biggest engine of economic prosperity for going on over 100 years, I'm sure. Additionally, we have energy resources in the northeast part of the province. We've got this pipeline controversy that's coming right through Kamloops here that benefits all Canadians, especially Western Canada. So these are national issues. But speaking specifically to the forestry industry, you know, 80% of BC's forest industry is located right here, right where we are in the interior of British Columbia. And we are on the cusp of the most devastating crisis in history. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Everywhere you go in this riding, that's all anybody's talking about. I've been knocking on doors, and the people I'm talking to, 2/3 and more of the crews are either facing layoffs or have been laid off. Yeah, or being laid off. And originally I'm from Saskatchewan. I operate a small ranch at Lac La Hache now, but coming from Saskatchewan, we don't have a lot of big trees, and that's the southern part. So I've consulted friends of mine that have been in the forest industry here for a long time. And there's a Mr. Bink, I think his name is. Now, I don't know him personally, but he wrote an article on the internet, and I mean, this guy has nothing to do with politics, and he makes that clear in the article. And he says, circumstances have come together to shape a perfect storm for failure for the British Columbia forest industry. And some of those circumstances are not politicians' fault, like bugs, you know, beetles. We can't blame the politicians for that, and even the forest fires, you know, as devastating as they were. But nevertheless, they're devastating to the forest industry and inventory. But there are things the government can do now. Provincially, I won't speak to it other than say that the stumpage fee, which is supposed to be tied to the market price of lumber, needs to reflect the market price of lumber a little quicker than it does. You know, it's several months behind, even though lumber is half the price it was a year ago. You know, so we're paying this exorbitantly high stumpage fee, but that's a provincial issue. I can't do anything. You need to talk to Mr. Horgan about that. But there's things we can do federally and to mitigate the crisis. It's going to be tough because, as Mr. Bink said, he owns several sawmills in the northern part of the province. It's a flat fact of life that we're overbuilt for the inventory that we have. And our inventory's been reduced by a couple of things. First of all, them bugs and beetles, you know, they've reduced the inventory, but the lumber industry, to its credit, when we got all this, it was a case of use it or lose it with all these dead trees. So we used it, and that meant everybody expanded. You know, we bought more trucks, we built more mills, we hired more people, because we didn't, you know, would have been a waste, right? Mm-hmm. So the flat fact is that the infrastructure is kind of overbuilt for the supply that's there. I think we were at 60 million board feet a year before the beetles and the fires. That was our annual harvest rate. Then when the beetles come along and did their devastation and the fires, we had all this extra material to use, so the industry, to its credit, stepped up to the plate, and we harvested somewhere in the order of 80 million board feet a year. But now the bug lumber's gone, you know, and the forest fires, that's all gone, but it did damage, so that means our annual harvest has to be decreased, you know, to reflect the inventory that we have in the province. So it went right past 60, where we used to be, 60 million board feet, went down to 40. So now we've got a low supply, coupled with lower prices, nearly half, and higher stumpage fees. So what can we do? Well, like I say, you got to talk to Mr. Horgan about the stumpage fees, but federally, our government should be reacting. And one of the things we can do that our current government has mishandled horribly, one of the largest, most lucrative markets in the world sits right on our southern border down here at Abbotsford, BC, or Sumas, Washington, and there's a 22% duty to prevent our lumber from going into that U.S. market, the biggest market in the world, for us anyway. The one that we've always depended on. And of course, every so many years we go to court with them, you know, over the softwood lumber thing, and we win every time, and nothing ever changes every time. So when our federal government sat down here 2 years ago with the Americans to renegotiate NAFTA, or maybe it was a year ago, what do Krista Freeland shows up at the negotiating table with? Now remember, we're dealing with Donald Trump here, or at least his government. And I don't care what you think of Donald Trump, but he is a hard-nosed, bully businessman. And if the best your negotiating team can show up with at the negotiating table is they want to talk about plastic straws and gender programs with a hard-nosed businessman that wants to talk dollars and cents, it doesn't work. So, what I'm saying, our party, the People's Party, we're against supply management. That's not a conservative principle. Now, the conservatives, under Andrew Scheer, are in favor of it, even though it's a contradiction of every conservative principle. You know, we believe in free markets. Philosophically, they should too, except they protect the dairy industry. Okay? So what we're willing to do and want to do, and our leader, Maxime Bernier, comes from a riding full of dairy farms, there's 9,000 of them. We want to get rid of, we want to put supply management on that negotiating table. That 300% duty that we charge to stop American dairy products from coming into Canada, we want to surrender that 300% duty in order for them to remove that 22%, that's what I would suggest, that 22% duty. And if we could get that 22% duty removed so that we had access to that lucrative American market, it wouldn't fix everything in our forestry crisis here, but it would darn sure mitigate it. And we need all the help we can get right now, and that's where the federal government needs to be. Have you heard anything from the federal government about the BC forest crisis? Not me. So locally, that's what I guess your question was, what would I focus on? And I would bring that to the forefront. You know, when we lose a few jobs down east in the auto sector or whatever, it's on the national news for 3 weeks. There's a crisis here that's very similar to what we saw in the energy industry affecting Alberta and Saskatchewan and northeast BC. You go to Fort St. John, Prince George and that country, and it looks just like the Alberta foothills. Big trucks everywhere. But they're all, a lot of them are parked now. One of the members of our own EDA, our executive here in Kamloops, he has a log truck's been parked since April. He's working as a mechanic. His taxes per load on a per load basis went up $1,000 a load. Devastating. It's well, this Mr. Bink that wrote the article on the internet, he said we've never seen nothing like it. We're just at the threshold right now. If we think it's bad now, yesterday I bought gas. Before I come down here, I filled up with gas last night, and the girl at the gas station said her husband's moving. He's been out of work since April. These people aren't kids. Her husband's 52 years old. He's got to move to find work. He's been laid off since April. And he's pretty much typical of every second door I knock on. And I just don't see it getting the recognition it deserves coming out of Ottawa, you know.